Hey everyone, I'm Joe and today I'm going to be doing a book review of Seveneves by Neal Stephenson. This is a hard science fiction novel and is often the case with Neal Stephenson. This is a rather large book. This particular edition is very close to 800 pages, although I believe in some editions you can get it where it's barely over 700, but still, it's still a large book and it's still pretty hefty with technical information and some pretty interesting ideas in total. Now, I will start off explaining the plot by reading the first sentence. And that is, the moon blew up without warning and for no apparent reason. Yeah, that's a drastic sentence and indeed explains it and brings to the fore the immediate problem instantly. And it is literally our moon, as in the moon that's above us right now, just one day explodes into various large chunks for reasons that at the start of the book we don't know. Obviously there is a reason given in the book, and this is obviously disastrous for many reasons. Of course, the moon affects our tidal system, so even if it weren't for other issues as well, this would be pretty bad as well. But scientists calculate fairly quickly that within no more than about 2, maybe 2.5 years, several of these large chunks of the moon will crash into Earth, which is obviously a disaster. This will essentially cause a new ice age, and this will make the Earth unlivable for many thousands of years. Therefore, it is then the job of all of humanity, led by obviously a particular cast of characters, to essentially try to figure out a way of us as a species to survive. We do this by trying to build a habitat, essentially a giant version of the ISS, the International Space Station, in orbit. Every country on Earth is trying to contribute to this. Of course, some countries on Earth are obviously unhappy about the fact that they are only getting a small amount of their population onto it, because this habitat, whilst it is indeed quite large, it can still hold nothing like even 1% of the population of the Earth. It's at most it's going to be a few thousand or a few tens of thousands at most if you're really lucky. And obviously the population of Earth is a lot more than 10,000, so this is only going to save a fraction, the very smallest fraction of the human population. This presents some interesting issues between countries, of course, some of which want to try to forcibly get onto this new sort of ISS, and others don't want to let them, and it's quite interesting in this way. This accounts for the first 2/3 of the book. The last 1/3, and what I'm about to say, sounds like a spoiler, but if you actually read the back of the book, it's really not. But this last 1/3 is set 5,000 years later, after the chunks of the moon, the effects of making it into an ice age has worn off, and in theory the surface of the Earth should be becoming more livable at that point. And this follows the sentence of humanity, who have been, well, surviving since then. How have they survived? Have they survived in space? Have they survived on other colonies on other planets, like a Mars colony or something? Or have they managed to come back to Earth? Obviously I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but it's very interesting the way they do it. It also questions what we are as humans at this point, because are we still physically and biologically what we are now, or have we evolved into something greater? Because of course spending time in either space or indeed on another planet, which obviously has different gravities, for 5,000 years, will that change us to any great degree, or will we manage to figure out a way of creating gravity for that kind of length of time and becoming, well, remaining human, or will we end up evolving into something completely different and almost unrecognisable from what we are now? Again, an interesting thought, and something that I thought was really quite nice to read about. In both this future and indeed the current section before the disaster, many different aspects of our world are explored, like the social, economic, financial, cultural and many other aspects. Obviously, this is explored in greater and lesser degree depending on the focus of the book at that particular time, and indeed whether it's before the disaster or set 5,000 years later, because the focus does shift significantly, of course, because the way and that humanity thinks has become something interesting in those 5,000 years. And I have to be very careful what I say about this, because this 5,000 year gap changes things in interesting ways, while certain other aspects stay the same. So I really can't say anything much else about the plot because it will give away spoilers, but it's fantastic, it really is. Now, the fact that the book discusses all these different aspects of the world creates a world that is both very similar to ours but also very different than ours, which is frankly remarkable considering it is indeed our world, like just in a few decades time essentially it's meant to be, at least at the start of the book. And this makes it both interesting and a very much a big what if question, but it also makes it relatable because it indeed is just a slightly more advanced version of Earth, and in some ways it's not any more advanced actually. We've still got lots of political sort of backstabbing going on and disastrous politicians, which obviously we have in the world right now. We still have massive financial corruption in many countries and many other aspects. It's still there. It's just handled on a case by case basis and handled in an interesting way and discussed and left open for the reader's interpretation, which I think is a nice touch, frankly, because this could have been done rather more heavy-handed if Stephenson hadn't been careful. It could have just been him talking to you, and instead he's talking with you, and you get the distinct impression that if you actually were to meet Stephenson and were to talk to him about this book, you could actually have a good conversation with him about a lot of the aspects that he brings up in this. Obviously he's really interested in the subjects that he writes about, and indeed obviously he did extensive research about, and you can have a conversation with him, you feel, about these subjects, which I don't know, it's not super rare. I mean, you often feel, it's, especially with science fiction books, you often feel, at least I do, that you could probably have a reasonable conversation with them, but it's still impressive, and especially considering the subject that he is indeed discussing in this, it's actually really interesting to see, and I greatly appreciate. One thing that Stephenson is well known for is his info dumping. This is basically where an author will write a large amount of technical information in the book, and there'll be very few breaks away from it. It will be one character either explaining it, or indeed in some cases it won't even be a character explaining it. It will be more like the author just sort of telling you directly about particular scientific principle or engineering principle, or a combination of those. And I know some people have an issue with this. I personally don't, and indeed, as long as it's done right, I don't think anybody should with this book, because it's not done heavy-handed, as I've previously said. It's done in an interesting way. He starts off with some of the more basic principles involved in obviously this giant version of the ISS in space, and then he quickly gets into the more complex nature of it. We're talking about trajectories and far more advanced things. And whilst having a knowledge, or at least a basic knowledge of this is useful, it is not necessary, because he explains it in a way that is not condescending, it's just instructional. And I can understand though, however, why people have issues with this, because having an instructional section as such in a book sometimes can be a bit annoying. I think Stevenson in this pulls it off extremely well. In some of his other books I've heard he doesn't pull it off as well, but he definitely does with this, because this is a very impressive achievement, frankly, and a piece of writing. As far as characters go, these are interesting and varied. Now, whilst they may be a little bit stereotypical in a very broad sense, and some of the characters do follow certain real life figures, and obviously loosely based on them. Like, for instance, there is a scientist in the book which is pretty much meant to be a Neil deGrasse Tyson type thing, you know, sort of popularising science for the general population. But in this context, and indeed in this world that Stephenson has created, this works extremely well, and it's fully understandable, and indeed, you kind of, it's needed in this circumstance. If a disaster like this were to happen, you would need somebody to explain these highly complex ideas to an enormous population of people very quickly and in a nice, simple, but understandable way. And obviously looking friendly and cheerful whilst doing so as well. So this may be a little bit stereotypical, as I said, but it works in this sense, and I'm quite happy with the way he wrote this, which I know some people have issues with, but you know, it's a personal choice thing, I think, more than anything else. This also applies in some respects to the world building, because of course this is indeed Earth, just a near future Earth. At least that started the book, obviously before the disaster, and then it becomes something different. Anyway, and this Earth, whilst it's similar, it's also very different, and it's done really well. There are some stereotypes in regards to like certain countries, you know, sort of being very suspicious and being very aggressive. Other countries are being very open and liberal. But again, this works because, frankly, that is in some respects the way the world works. There are some very aggressive countries on Earth. There are some very sort of countries that are very sort of in the middle, but there are also some extremely liberal countries. So this book does play on that, and indeed does use it, because that is the way the world works, and indeed the world in this works in its own way, which I think works. And this combination of both normal, sort of relatively predictable people and a predictable environment makes this book relatable and understandable, which frankly, considering the ideas and some of the higher concepts in this, it needs, because without it, it'd be a mess, frankly, and would be horrible to read, and I wouldn't have enjoyed this book as much as I did, because overall I really enjoyed this book. It has some great ideas, some good characters, some good world building. It's written in an interesting way. Everything's linked up, and it just works in a curious way that might seem heavy-handed, but it's actually not. It's more intricate and more personal than you'd imagine, especially considering the size. I mean, a book of this size, you don't expect it to be too personal, but it actually really is, because mainly Neal Stephenson remembers that the main focus behind a book like this, yes, he may have an interest in the science and the engineering principles in it, but you've still got to make it relatable to humanity. You know, this is a story about humanity and what it might become one day if we're in a vaguely similar situation. He doesn't forget about the people, because of course people are going to be reading the book, so you thought, you know, there'd be no point in forgetting about the people, because the book would be, as I said, a mess, and it's not. I would highly recommend this to, of course, hard science fiction fans, but also anybody wanting to read a book where ideas on what humanity is, what it has been, and what it might be are questioned and indeed are answered with some pretty interesting and remarkable writing thrown in for good measure. And with that said, that is it for this review of Seveneves by Neal Stephenson. If you've read this book or you would like to read it, then please leave a comment and we can have a conversation. All my social media links can be found in the description box below, as always are. With that said, that is it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you another time. Bye for now.